So the day we met, it was a pretty eventful day.
Yeah,
Do you remember it?
I remember that day.
What do you remember about that?
So I remember it as it was RSV season. I had a little 4-month-old infant that came in with respiratory distress. None of that was remarkable. It's what all the kids were doing around that time. So he comes into the ICU at St. Joe.
I recall.
So, and that's when we met. And he was in distress. He was having difficulty breathing. And by the end of that day, it was clear that he was in respiratory failure. So at this point, I have to intubate him. And if you remember, of course you remember, he had had surgery in his esophagus.
I do.
And down his trachea, which made that an intubation that I had to be careful with.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember that was the first challenge. That went smoothly. We got his breathing tube in, and he seemed to be doing just fine, when all of a sudden, I'm standing beside you, and you're on one side of the bed, and I'm watching his monitor, and his heart goes ding, 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 and I say to the nurse, start CPR. And trying not to put you into too much distress yourself, but wanting you to understand that something serious is going on here.
I think by the time they called Code Blue, I figured it out real quick.
So that was his first code.
Yep.
And that was when he blew his first pneumothorax. And he did a few more of that day when we were able to deal with that. But I needed to put him on a different type of ventilator, which I did not have at St. Joe. But because I also was in charge of the ICU at Memorial, I transferred him to Memorial so that I could use the oscillator at Memorial to oxygenate him.
I remember thinking, I have never had to trust somebody I did not know more than in that minute. That was a big day.
Well, that was.
Hey, it was life-changing for a lot of reasons.
It was life-changing for both of us. It was life-changing for Max, but it was also the start of a very special relationship.
Yeah.
Because at that point in time, I was the only intensivist in town, running both ICUs, and this little guy, Max, needed 3 intensivists taking care of him because everybody needed to be fresh, looking after him. And after he blew a few more of those pneumothoraces and then blew one that also had air around his heart, I called you and I said, prepare to travel because we're going to have to transfer him to Riley. And
that was at 3:30 in the morning.
Because I really hadn't left his bedside in 4 days.
Oh, yeah. And the remarkable part was really that was really the beginning of a long medical journey with Max. And like you said, it's kind of the beginning of our story. And I remember one of the greatest parts about Boomy was that she called me every day that we were at Riley. And I thought, that is so unusual to have a doctor care enough to talk to me every day about how is Max doing, what's the status of Max today, and I learned all these new medical terms and jargon, and it felt very sophisticated in moments, I recall. And then I remember later, like, you were so sweet to call me every day, and you're like, I was just checking on Max, it really wasn't about you, which is so indicative of how you are. And just your love of children in general. Yeah.
Yeah, that was when you take care of a child that is that critically ill, at least for me, you can't really get them out of your head or your mind. And following up with them wherever they are was very important to me. And knowing that you were out there by yourself, away from home, which was always my concern with my critically ill children here in South Bend. If I had to transfer them to Riley, I did it because they needed more help than I could provide alone in South Bend. But I also did not like the idea of letting go of them and sending them away from home. And so I always wanted to know how things were going, where you are. And I wish I could say that, on the medical side, we're as good as we should be about keeping each other updated, but we're not. So I call the parents. And so at least I know if I call you, I'll know how Max is doing.
And you did, faithfully, daily.
So, and then he spends an extended period of time in Indianapolis, and then we begin to say, Max should be able to come back home now.
It had been 5 months, so I was in total agreement with that decision.
And I remember what we went through trying to make that happen.
Yeah.
In some areas we had cooperation, and in some areas we did not. But we knew we could care for Max here. And so we, again, were asking you to trust us to bring him back home and have the rest of his care closer to home for you and closer to the rest of your family and friends to have support for yourself. So Max came back home, again to St. Joe, where we now started training you for taking Max home.
Yeah, that was a lot.
That was that. Within the limits of our ability at the time and our knowledge at the time, he now had a tracheostomy and he had a feeding tube, and we needed to teach you how to care for those things at home.
And
so,
what an adjustment, I remember being in the hospital, and I remember it was you were preparing me. It's almost time to go home with Max, and so now he had like you said, a feeding tube, a ventilator, all of this equipment, and it was scary. But I remember that night it was, you take care of Max overnight, and you successfully do that, you get to go home. So really, as a parent, after 5 months, all you can think about is, I get to bring my child home, and you're so excited. And then I remember everybody coming to say goodbye, because we had obviously spent a pretty long duration with everybody there. And I remember thinking, boy, I'm a smart cookie, but this is a lot. I now need to be the doctor, the nurse, the OT, the PT, the speech, the dietary, the respiratory. I was saying goodbye to all these people who had been caring for him, and I realized it was going to be me, and that was overwhelming. That was a lot. But we managed with a lot of help.
yes, so Max comes home with home care nursing and you, and home care, just as is the nature of home care nursing, is needed for a child with that many special needs, but sometimes it can fail you because people provide the home care and they have families too, and sometimes their child gets sick, or sometimes staffing is not what it should be in their company. And then you're left taking care of the child alone. And I still remember the night that you had not slept in 2 days. And I said, Teal, make no decisions right now because you're not right.
Then I knew it. And do you know that ended up to be 24 nights in a row I did not sleep because we had no home care nurse overnight. And so we had therapies during the day, and I didn't really want to miss those. And so yeah, you just become a very vigilant.
Fall asleep when you can. When he takes a nap, you take a nap.
And like any parent, I mean, you do whatever it takes to take care of your child. And it's not just taking care of your child and making sure that they have what they need for the day. It's life and death in those scenarios. And if you make an error, you feel like, at that point, you feel like this is all on me. This is my responsibility. And that was huge. So I remember, so fast forward and Max starts, right? He starts doing better. And you were I remember, kind of big and puffy chested. Well, I knew he would, and I'm very proud of him. And so it was time to come back to the hospital to take out his trach and his G-tube. And that was a pretty fun, if you can say you had a fun stay at a hospital, that was it, because it was a lot of celebration as he was able to do that and pass milestones that I did not realize were even as significant as they were at the time. I remember when we first started talking about A Rosy Place, and you started telling people the story of Max and what that was. Tell me that story again about most children that you see as critical as Max was, and
Well,
the outcome.
so Max was a very prototypical medically fragile child. That Max, if you had a picture of a medically fragile child in a dictionary somewhere, it would be Max.
Yeah.
Because what that means is to have a critical illness or injury that leaves you with needs that you didn't have before, on which your life depends and on which you live every day at home. And so he had medication, breathing treatments, and he had equipment. So he was your typical medically fragile child. What was special about Max was the number of times that his heart stopped in the course of that 5 months. The number of times that we had to resuscitate him, both in South Bend and in Indianapolis. Mm-hmm. And I still remember the day you called me when they were resuscitating him in Indianapolis, and you said, should we just pray for God to take him? And I said, no, we just pray for God's will to be done, whatever God's will is. I knew that he had had enough insults at the time that he may survive. If he wasn't going to survive, let God's will be done, and we will get to that point without having to be the ones that made that decision. But when he came home and he was able to get his tracheostomy and get his feeding tube, as we watched him develop, I had hope for him. And I was like, this kid is there. And that's, I mean, we're human. We don't have all the answers, and we don't have crystal balls, but there's just certain, not the lab work, not the respiratory tests. There are other things that you can't put your finger on when you've watched enough children like that you can see that he's developing, that give you hope. And overlapping the time that he was going home from hospital, the group of us was meeting about medically fragile children. This whole group of people here in South Bend, some of us were working in the hospital, some were teachers, some were administrators in home care. We just came from a wide range of backgrounds, but we all had something in common, which is we had had experience either with a family with a medically fragile child, or were taking care of them at work or in a vocation somewhere. And we all started noticing the impact that having a child survive an illness or an injury that severe has on the family.
I remember that conversation, and I remember saying to you, as Max gets better, if there's anything I can ever do that can help families just like mine, because we know that most of these children don't turn out as well as Max did. I know that he's a miracle, and it's so fortunate. And so to be able to step in as the parent representative, I was proud that day.
Yeah, so as we were having our meetings and we were talking about what we were going to do with this group that we were forming and how are we going to support these families, from my point of view as an intensive care physician, I was watching these kids. I take care of them in the ICU, they do better, they go home, and then I watch the family fall apart after they go home, and I think, I love the fact that they did well. I love the fact that they survived, but then they go home and then the other siblings are not getting as much attention, or the parents are getting divorced. I'm like, something's wrong with this equation here. So we've got to add something to this that makes it better all the way around. And so as we met and we started forming Ohana Heritage Foundation, we said, we need an end user. We need somebody that gets it, someone who's lived this life, who knows exactly what we're describing. And I said, I know who we have. And I kept telling them, I said, as soon as she's freed up enough to be able to come to meetings, I'm going to bring this young lady called Teal. And you were so young at the time.
I know. I'm going to try not to be offended by that now, as though I'm so old.
Well, hey, I aged too, so.
But better than most.
So I said, I'll bring Teal, and she'll be a parent representative on this panel. And we'll have a parent in our midst who knows exactly what it's like to live with these needs at home. And she can tell us what would she have? So we have somebody who needs this service telling us what do the families need.
And boy, you didn't know what you were asking for, did you?
And so we were all excited, and as it turns out, you had met one or the other of us. You had met Liz in the process of having home care nursing from their company. You'd met Chris in the hospital, and did Dr. Agostino do his trach? No?
He managed it after.
So, yes. So you knew a few others, so when you came to the meeting, it was not exactly a strange place. And then, of course, fast forward another year or two after that, when we needed to actually hire somebody that could be a face and representative for the organization, I said, it's a no-brainer. We don't have to script Teal. She knows exactly what to say because it's her life. And that was the beautiful thing, of being able to have somebody who truly understood what we were trying to do and have that person come on as part of our team right from the beginning.
And my passion too, right, was really having that parent perspective. If we were going to do something for parents, to make sure that every step of the way we put it through the lens of a parent. And so I recall that being very paramount for me all these years, still to this day. I always think about it through that lens of, if I were a parent of a medically fragile child like I used to be, what would I want to see today? And I think that's been a big inspiration behind some of the decisions that we made along the way to build it the way we did. Why something outside of home? Remember, we got asked that a lot. Why wouldn't you just help them where they're at? And I remember we used to have those discussions because you don't stop being a parent when a nurse shows up to help support you. You don't stop being a parent just because you might have outside support. No matter what, you're still the parent all the time. And therefore, trying to have something outside of that and realizing the benefit of something extraordinary for the child. And we began to focus on the life of the child and the quality of life for the family. And that just got me jazzed up, didn't it? I was fired up at that point.
And that was how Ohana Heritage Foundation gave birth to A Rosy Place for Children. Of course, we got our name, A Rosy Place for Children, due to the generosity of some really wonderful people in our community. But in terms of forming A Rosy Place for Children, a lot of thought went into the fact that we were asking parents who had taken care of their medically fragile child at home to trust us with the care of their child. So our first focus was to provide what is called respite care. And respite care is care of the family that allows them to get some rest. That's basically what it is, because what they're doing on an everyday basis is work in caring for the child, in feeding, in giving medications, in doing therapies. And that goes on 24 hours a day in the life of a parent of a medically fragile child, such that somehow they never make room for themselves to get some rest. They don't feel like they can let up enough. It looks like it's dangerous for their child for them to look away. And so they continue to be in that mode day in, day out. Unfortunately, life happens, and sometimes they have other children, they have spouses, they have other people who need their attention for whom they absolutely have no time. So whether it's the father that's caring for the child, mom is ignored. If the mom that's caring for the child, dad is neglected, and so are other family members, and so are so many other things in life that you and I would pay attention to, like having a social life, sometimes like having a job. And so when a medically fragile child comes home and the parent therefore loses their job because they have to care for them 24 hours, the quality of life of that entire family goes down with that. The quality of life for the entire family goes down when anybody in the family is neglected. And so that was our focus at first, was how can we provide a place where the family can trust us with their child enough to let us have him or her for a day or two while they get some sleep, or they get their hair washed, or they go to the doctor for themselves, or they go to the other child's baseball game, or something. that the family
And
might
I
want
think,
to
you know, originally when we came up with the idea of a Rosie Place, really respite was the only fitting word. I don't know that it ever encompassed all that we hoped to do, dreamt to do, still are doing and going to do. It was just the closest term that we could find that encompassed all of that. And what we found in beginning to care for families with these children are, it's not, you know, some people go, oh, a babysitter. Yeah, no, it's not babysitting. It is coming alongside a family that requires some love, some care, validation. We not only saw kids coming that so parents could go to a siblings baseball game or have some needed rest because they just worked a 70-hour week and trying to maintain their insurance program. But it became for a mother who needed surgery. There was nobody to watch her child while she recovered. And I remember she waited 2.5 years for us to build a Rosie Place. She called before we even put a shovel in the ground. You know, that's pretty significant when you have to put your own health on hold and you're the primary caregiver of that child. And then not only did that child come so that the mother could have surgery, the other sibling got to spend time with their father, which they hadn't ever been able to take a trip together. So they were able to do that over a 4-day period. And just so many things we saw, right, come out of that, I think. And so in going and talking to donors and talking about this new idea of what we were gonna, you know, we were facing a brand new cause, right? Not many people had heard of medically fragile children back then. Most of these children, right, even from a physician standpoint, they were dying. They were not living past a certain age, right?
That was part of the development of the need for a place like a Rosie Place. I've been in medical practice long enough to remember when a lot of the kids that had these types of illnesses did not survive. They did not come home from hospital. And what created the need for a Rosie Place and places like a Rosie Place is the increased survival of medically fragile children from illnesses and injuries from which they used to die. And I remember when we would first talk to our initial donors, we would say some of these children will survive, some will not. Some will get better from their illness, and some will not, because it depends on what their condition is. Some of our kids with medical fragile conditions have genetic illnesses that will eventually take their lives in a short period of time. But during the time that they're here with us, we want to optimize their quality of life. We want to optimize the quality of life of their parents and their family, so that if that child survives, the family is not worse off. And if he or she does die, the family is not left totally broken in such a way that they can't pick up the pieces. And it was always a struggle being able to see how do we present this to families and have them trust us without feeling that they were saying they could not care for their own child. And that was very important when we started designing the house, because we wanted it to be a place where medically fragile children would want to be there, and their siblings would be jealous of them, that they came to a place so beautiful and so fun.
That was always one of your goals.
Yes, I wanted, because a medically fragile child, so a child who maybe doesn't talk or doesn't walk or has a tracheostomy, has a machine on which he lives, you know, on the surface, who would be envious of a child like that? Not even their sibling would be envious. But when they come to a Rosie Place for children, you better believe their sibling takes attention. Like, you get to go where?
Yeah, I love that they've dubbed it a hotel for kids. I think that's great, and really shines on what we've tried to do here together. Early on, when we would go talk to people, I remember we were like, right, we were like little schoolgirls. We were like, well, we can't wait to tell you what we're doing. And you know, our community really responded to that. Not only understanding, and I think we heard often, by the grace of God, it's not my child. Yes. What can we do to help these families? And I believe our community understands that these children and families are part of our community. They're not, what do we do about this community? They are part of our community, and we're needed. We're needed to step up for these families who do not have the time, the energy, or the wherewithal, right, to do something about it. Yeah, yeah.
It's very notable that a lot of the families that donated to make a Rosie Place possible did not even have medically fragile children.
No.
Most of the families that gave us the money to make it possible for us to get here did not themselves have medically fragile families. And many times we were bringing these families to their attention for the first time. And then they started noticing all the other medically fragile children in their community, like, oh, I saw my neighbor so-and-so, and her grandchild was in a special type of wheelchair. And then we brought these children to the awareness of our community in ways that made them continue to support us, and I think that's
what was one of your we've certainly gone and talked to a lot of people together over the last 14 years. Tell me a time where you went and you spoke with a donor or somebody who didn't know about us. What's one of your favorite memories you have of somebody that we would go talk to? Well,
I distinctly remember a new businessman that came to town, and I said, well, I understand that there's this new business down the road on Grape Road, and I understand that he may not be involved in charitable organizations in the community yet. I said, I think we need to go talk to him before somebody else grabs him, and I think we need to get him to understand what we're doing, and maybe he can help us. And we were getting ready to have our first big fundraiser, and we needed help with that. And remember, we had our little video that we used to play to show people what a medically fragile child is, and who are these families that need your help, and what is our dream to build a house for them. And so we went and had lunch with him at the restaurant, it used to be called Houlihan's Restaurant. And over lunch, we played him a little video of what we were talking about. And I still remember, it was like breaking down a wall, this nice, well-dressed businessman in his clean, crisp white shirt who came to have lunch with us because he was giving us audience, like, let's hear what these ladies have to say. And I'll never forget the fact that the moment at which he got it, because tears rolled down his cheeks right there across the table from us. And then I'm thinking, oh dear, what did we do? But then I recognized that that was recognition of the value of what we were talking about. And that individual and their company became one of the first donors that gave us something substantial to be able to fundraise around at the time. That was one that I always remembered because it was a real gamble. We didn't know him. He was new in town. We made an appointment to see him, and we thought, we'll come talk to you about this new innovative way of taking care of special children that we have in South Bend. He himself was new to South Bend, and he didn't turn us away, and he listened, and he got it. And
it's always a good day, right?
Yes,
when you
that was a really good day. Of course, our meeting with our big benefactors was a very interesting day too.
That was a great dinner, wasn't it? One of my favorite meetings on trying to get not one, but we had an entire group of men come together. That was probably one of my favorite ones. Very early on when we talked about building a Rosie Place, we wanted to find somebody who would step up and help build it. So as tenacious as we were, we got 8 competitors, right, in the same room. Somebody had lent us a boardroom. So we have all of these owners of large commercial construction companies in the same room, which didn't happen very often. And we sort of gave them this is what we're building, and this is what we're excited about, and you would talk about finances, and I would talk about family, and we just kind of went through and painted this picture. And I never forget, and the gentleman who ended up building it, I remember him standing up at the table, and he puts his hands on the table, and he says, I don't know who you two think you are, but I'm in. And so that was a pretty big home
Do you
run.
remember the program they used to have on television at that time where builders would come together and build a house for a family?
Oh yeah, with Ty Pennington.
Yes, they had a program then. We thought, why can't we do that in South Bend? We get all these builders together, and you do the roof, and you do the shingles, and you do the drywall.
That made perfect sense to us.
We thought, why can't they collaborate and do this?
The construction gurus that we were.
Yes. And he said to us, no, that would be like herding cats.
Yeah.
He said, but I'm in. So that was also a very momentous day. And then the day that we got a big donation. I remember both of us walking away from there thinking, did they hear us at all? Did they even hear a thing
We really
said?
weren't sure. Yeah. And then they called us the next morning.
And had agreed to give us $1 million. And we were like, whoa.
We want to give $1 million to the children.
Yes. So, I mean, there were lots of, now those were nice meetings and those were successful meetings. And there were a number of others that were not so successful that we walked away thinking, how can they not understand? How could they really say no to us? But thankfully, we were very able to shake that off and go to the next process.
We had very few of those, I think, in our
general,
history.
there were a few of them.
And some of my favorite donors actually are ones that I've never even met. We have a lady outside of Chicago who lives in the suburbs. I envision her, what she looks like. I've never been able to meet her. I've invited her here. And do you know, she's given $25 a month for years, and I've never met her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Talk about sort of dedication and commitment. And I have no idea what her tie is to here. So while I respect her privacy and don't hunt her down, I just think of her often because she's remarkable.
Commitment.
Yeah.
Well, and so A Rosy Place started functioning, and we started seeing the results of what we had invested in and what we had planned to do, and we started providing respite care. And today we see ourselves growing up and moving into all the other areas that are required for the care of medically fragile children and their families. And so these kids have long-standing, sometimes terminal illnesses, and they require palliative care, which is care that makes you comfortable during an ongoing illness, care that just focuses on your quality of life, whether or not you're likely to survive this. And then we begin to get asked to participate in hospice care, which tends to be more palliative care towards an imminent looking end of life. And so the last couple of weeks of life where how can we make you pain-free? How can we make you maybe in some ways achieve some of the things that you wanted to achieve before you die, so we can put those things in place for you? And how can we plan for afterwards by making sure that the transition is peaceful? And we have medically fragile children requiring a variety of these services. And there is still really no place in our area that provides that care. So again, A Rosy Place begins to be a place that people look at to say, how can you help provide this care? The other thing that comes to my mind is we now know that there are many families that have foster children, and foster children are easily taken into families if they don't have medical needs. But if a foster child has a medical need, like a feeding tube, a breathing tube, a ventilator, or some other machinery, it's a lot harder to get a foster family to accept that child. And so now there's a need to train families who are willing to take medical foster kids.
Yeah, I'm always surprised by the calls that we get from potential foster families on, could you help train us? What an extraordinary couple that would take to foster a fragile child.
To willingly, it's when you have your own child and they have a medical need, you say, well, I didn't ask for this, but here we go, this is my child. But to have families who seek out kids with medical fragile conditions, to be foster parents for them, willingly asking to be the ones to take on the responsibility. Those are special people. Unfortunately, we don't have a system in town that helps train them, and sometimes they find themselves flailing, and sometimes they find themselves having no choice but to have the child admitted in hospital so that the hospital staff can teach them about those equipments. So again, I see that as one of the areas of service that a Rosie Place will be getting into as we grow up and have the resources to support those families as well.
I think, you know, what we're hearing, the feedback that we get from families is always so rewarding. I think, you know, we've done this in a way that really looks at the family unit as a whole and how do we approach caring for your child. And I think that really resonates with our staff. I keep hearing back from families that say, you know, you really do care, you really do take the time to get to know and understand my child so that they can not just have a safe stay when it comes to their medical care, but this extraordinary vision of, no, we don't want to just make sure that they get their meds and they get their food and they're all hooked up to their machinery, but, you know, could we go outside and swing with Joey or Susie? You know, could we paint with them? Are they able to take a bubble bath? And those are the things that I hear back from families where they go, you just know a Rosie Place is different when you sort of enter this space that honors life and quality of those children and the families that we serve. And that's sure been a big privilege, I think, and kind of has made all the hard work pretty worth it.
Worth it.
Yeah.
Well, could we use help every day?
Every day. Every day.
We still, first of all, I'm truly grateful for all the work that we have been able to do, and especially with you in development and fundraising and grant writing and all the different ways in which we're pulling every dime that we can to make it possible to pay the staff, to make it possible to keep the lights on, to make the place remain nice and sweet and clean and safe for these children and these families. But it's that there's no end to the need for fundraising. There's no end to the need for looking for assistance from wherever it may come so that we can be alive next year and we can be here and not just be here but thrive and continue to expand the services that we're able to provide for families. It's our hope that more places like a Rosie Place will spring up all over the country.
Absolutely.
Because there are medically fragile children all over this country, and a Rosie Place for Children is the only one of its kind in the state of Indiana, and that's just too few. So even in Indiana, we need more. In other states of the country, we could use a whole lot more. And
I think that's been awesome in this journey, right, that we've been on together. We've really kept that in mind of how are we going to replicate this? Because it shouldn't just be in Indiana or one state or another. It should be across our country. Because clearly, as you have so eloquently said, genetic illness does not discriminate. And we're going to see more and more of this. And how are we embracing them and caring for these families so that there's quality? But I love too, right, that our passion and our excitement about what we're doing seems to have no bounds. I think we've said too, right, for $5 million, we'll go build another Rosie Place.
Another Rosie Place somewhere else.
Let's go get that done.